I didn't have a close connection with my biological parents in terms of understanding the cultural events in the Samoan language. People assume that I know how to speak Samoan and that I know the cultural language, but I don't. So I felt like a fraud. None of my parents went through university. I really had no idea about STEM or science. I kind of just followed my friends and enrolled. That really just started my whole science journey. I knew that I wanted to do something related to my community as a Samoan. Unfortunately, a lot of our Samoan communities, Tonga communities, are most at risk of type 2 diabetes. Samoan traditional foods are from the land and the sea. We can actually see our diet history through our genetics. Nothing is going to go right, but perseverance. You don't have to be the smartest person. You just have to be willing to work really hard and not give up.
Talofa dear Suga Wamai. This week leads into February 11, International Day of Women and Girls in Science. I wanted to release a conversation that celebrates women in STEM and remind us why visibility and representation matter. Today, I'm sitting down with Amy Maslin-Miller, and most of you probably know her from social media as Samoan Scientist. Amy is a PhD candidate at the University of Auckland, and her research explores Samoan traditional food and how this knowledge can support Pacific community health. What I loved about this conversation is we didn't just stay on the title. We talked about how her path into science began, her personal story, and how she's learning more about identity as she's moved through education and research. So if you're curious about STEM, or if you ever ask yourself what it looks like to build a path that connects culture, community, and science, I think you'll really enjoy this episode. So without further ado, let's get into it. Amy, I think the people that are actually going to be part of the podcast have an inkling as to who you are. Your presence on social media is very evident. Maybe you could provide some little light into who is the Samoan Scientist.
I am a New Zealand-born Samoan and raised by my mum, who's a hairdresser, my dad, he was a cabinet maker, and my nana, she was a taxi driver. She had a little shop and many other things. I was raised as an only child here in New Zealand, but I was actually adopted from birth into my New Zealand family. So I also have my Samoan family. My dad is from the island of Manono in Samoa, and my Samoan mum is from a village called Sapapali'i in Savaii, Samoa.
That's pretty cool. I'm just curious, was it an open adoption? So did you knew your parents growing up?
Yeah, my New Zealand mum and my Samoan mum were best friends. They worked at the same rest home together. So ever since I can remember, I've always known about my siblings. So I have 2 sisters and 1 brother, and they're kind of raised within the same area within Auckland here in New Zealand.
But I'm curious now as to a particular moment that kind of made you go, STEM is the field I want to go into.
None of my parents went through university. My New Zealand parents or my Samoan parents. So I really had no idea about STEM or science. It was really through my high school, which was very academic focused. So I took a lot of the sciences in high school and then understood that when people finished high school, they generally go to university. And that's what a lot of my friends were doing. They were going to university and enrolling in medical school. So at the end of high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I thought science would be a good career to go forward with. So I kind of just followed my friends and enrolled in science at the University of Auckland. And that really just started my whole science journey.
So there's a lot of fields in science, right? Which area of science did you concentrate on?
In my first year, I did a range of papers like geography, your plant science, marine science, also human sciences. But I found that I really like the plant science side. So molecular work, understanding plant genetics, and then from my first year, I just continued on with plant papers throughout the rest of my bachelor's degree.
What I've seen so far in terms of your posts, there's an emphasis on traditional food. So I'm going to assume, because I don't know much, that's what you're pursuing in your PhD. But correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, part of my work is looking at traditional foods. And I decided to look at Samoan traditional foods because I'm Samoan. And also, we have a lot of Samoans here in New Zealand. So the Samoan community was a really big part of my work.
I mean, you could have done your paper on anything. So why focus in on just Samoa?
I knew that I wanted to do something related to my community as a Samoan because I'm also on my identity journey of learning more about Samoan culture. And I also wanted the PhD research to be helpful for our communities. So unfortunately in New Zealand, a lot of our Samoan communities, Tonga communities are most at risk of type 2 diabetes. So I thought, well, since I'm Samoan, I want to know more about my Samoan culture and our communities are more at risk of type 2 diabetes. And I decided to look at Samoan traditional foods within our Samoan community here in New Zealand.
I've watched your podcasts and I'm curious as to particularly what type of food you're looking into.
Yeah, with my research, it's actually kind of developed. So I kind of see my work as looking at the past and the present to better understand type 2 diabetes to help with our Pacific communities. So when I look to the past, I look at the written records about our Samoan traditional foods, as well as talking to our elders within our Samoan community and the younger generation within our Samoan community and understanding that our Samoan traditional foods are foods from the land and the sea. So taro, breadfruit, coconut, yam, banana, and fish. So those were foods that were commonly eaten all the time, generally pescatarian diet in the 18 before colonization and early contact of the missionaries that came over to Samoa.
So, what are some of the top three things that you probably have come across that strikes as interesting for you and continues to help you propel forward with your studies?
What's really interesting in terms of Samoan traditional foods, because I only really understood our foods as like pisopo, sapsui, and things like that. But I didn't realize that traditional foods were foods from the land and the sea and that they were brought to the islands by our Polynesian ancestors. Because there weren't actually a lot of foods in the Pacific Islands. They were brought here by ancestors and grown. Another interesting thing is that my work also looks at the genetics, so genetics related to our diet. And a lot of our Samoan women are lactose intolerant, which is what we would expect. When we look at our traditional diets, there's no presence of dairy at all. So we can actually see our diet history through our genetics and that we're really lactose intolerant and shouldn't be eating or drinking a lot of milk or dairy products like yogurt or cheeses, even though they're really good to eat.
Maybe I'm pivoting a little bit, but what is your top favorite food?
It definitely have to be something like from the umu. Nothing beats an umu being made in Samoa and like eating it fresh for tonight for Sunday lunch. Like you just can't beat it. So like banana. I quite like breadfruit, so I think it might have to be like a breadfruit. So good.
I always tell myself, like, if tomorrow something happened, the last meal I want to have is like really like fresh baked ulu with some miki mafu and some kui kui or kina.
Yeah, yeah.
So to me, that's like if I have that, I can die and be in heaven. That's my meal. So talking about Miki Mafu, I think one of the things that I really enjoyed when I was doing a little research and listening to your podcast, and you were talking about a certain way that we actually ferment ulu. So I don't think it's a common knowledge out there. I do remember my mom talking about how they would store bananas. They would dig the ground and then they would put the bananas there to ripe. And it's supposed to be like a natural refrigerator, but it was the first time I heard about ulu. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit more as to that research.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I didn't know this as well, but we used to have our fermented breadfruit as part of our diet. So we call it, I think, masi ulu. So generally after harvest of breadfruit, sometimes I'd have kind of leftover breadfruit. They would peel off the skin and then they'll dig a big pit and they'd line the pit with banana leaves, breadfruit leaves, and then place the peeled ulu into the pit. They'd then cover it back over, I think with the leaves and then the soil on top. And then generally they'd let it ferment. It could be months, it could be a year. And generally, people would have it like a food security. So during the cyclones, a lot of the fruit would be wiped off the trees. But if they had the fermented breadfruit in the ground, it's a food source for them. So when they need it, they would uncover the pit. It kind of smelled like, people documented it smelling like moldy cheese. And then they would grab a bit of the fermented breadfruit. It's kind of mushy. And then they'll shape it into like a bread loaf and then cook it in the umu. And that could actually be transported for voyages as well, but also eaten straight away. And you're right, I haven't heard of anyone actually doing the breadfruit fermentation. I've only really read about it. And
Uh-huh.
also, you mentioned the ripening of the banana as well. That's even more rare. Not many people know about that too. It's really interesting because when we talk about fermentation and a really hot topic now in science is the gut microbiome and how there's a lot of products that good for your gut health or like the kombucha and things like that. But it
Hmm.
made me realize, oh, we actually had like a natural fermentation thing that we had going on. Like that'd be really
Yeah.
cool to visit that.
I think so too. I mean, that's what I hear a lot, right? Prebiotic, probiotic in terms of like yogurt, kimchi. So I'm half Korean. So that's like something they're always talking fermentation. But we do have that, like you just said. So Miki Mafu is sort of like that fermented process of leaving the coconut out. I don't think anyone really likes Miki Mafu, but I do.
How long
So
do you leave it out for? I don't done it before.
I don't know. Okay, I'll be honest. Like, I usually back home, because my family usually puts it together, but I think they leave it out for a day or two. But I love it because they add the small little hot peppers. That's what I like. It's very pungent, but
I haven't had it before. I want to try that
uh,
though.
well, because you came across with this really cool study, would that be part of like your, I don't know, your dissertation to actually recreate that process?
I would love to. And I feel like with my thesis, it's provided a foundation to learn more about our traditional foods and potentially measure them using like Western scientific techniques. Because there's a lot of research about the Mediterranean diet, which is a traditional diet, and the amount of health benefits. It's great for cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And I'd love the same for our traditional foods, our Pacific foods, where we would give people, like a traditional diet and then monitor to see how it affects them over a year or a couple of years in terms of their health. And so I really hope that that could be something that I could do or someone else takes the knowledge that I've done and just creates like a experiment with that. Because I feel like we know that our traditional foods are really good for us, but we've lost that knowledge. And I'm trying to bring that knowledge here in 2026 so we can have healthier lives and live longer for our families.
That's pretty good. That just made me think. So, my last guest works as a researcher with the American Samoa Cancer Coalition. And she and I had the same sort of discussion where she talked about the Mediterranean diet. But we also kind of inserted in there that I think the Samoan diet is actually a great one. I mean, traditional Samoan diet. So, I'm curious because I know that in American Samoa, they're conducting these studies, and I know that you're in New Zealand. Is there like a way that you're able to connect with other Pacific Island scientists to kind of share that information?
Yeah, that's a really good point because there are a few of us working in the Pacific. I guess I think like immediately through my social media platform, through Samoan Scientist, where people can message. And I will also be sharing my results from my thesis on that social media platform. When it comes to doing different research like cancer or diabetes within the Pacific, a lot of things overlap, particularly with diet. And I know some cancers are very diet specific, that if women have higher amounts of fat related to what they're eating, it can increase risk of cancers. But that'd be great to connect with them.
Yeah. Is there like a forum out there or any platform that's already created that brings different scientists to talk about the studies that they are doing?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there isn't one. There's not like a big network. I just recently went to the States end of November and visited researchers that do work in Samoa, non-Pacific, but also Pacific researchers. And there's quite a lot of us and a lot of our work overlaps. And it'd be the same in Australia, here in New Zealand, in the States, and I think in the UK potentially. And that's a really good point in having a forum or like a database of people doing the work what they found or who they're working with in the islands. Like, that'd be amazing.
During your time in Samoa, because you spent some time in Samoa helping out. So, Lima, from my previous episode, was talking about how it's difficult at times to transport the samples from one to another place. So, I'm curious as to your experience. What was that experience like for you when you were in Samoa?
I worked in Samoa for a year at the Scientific Research Organization of Samoa, so we call it SROS. And my work was a lot around the crops. So I did work in taro. We're lucky that a lot of the work that we did, we had all the plant material there and fungi, infect taro to see what it looks like and things like that. But it is really hard if we're wanting to either take samples out of Samoa and bring them back to New Zealand. There are different biosecurity standards. You have to store them in certain ways, and even plant material as well. Depending where you go, Australia and New Zealand are very strict in terms of taking plant material out of the Pacific Islands into kind of laboratory environments. And when we have to do that there's a lot of regulations and paperwork that we have to go through. But I was lucky with my work that we were able to just do our experiments on the taro there, which is great.
Yeah. So I'm curious because I grew up also in Samoa where they're like, yeah, ole kalofiki or kalokonga. Like so many, I don't
Yeah.
even know. There seems to be a lot of variety of taro. So I'm curious because you've done all these samples. What is your favorite type of taro?
It has to be the pink variety, like where the tiapula, the stem's like a pink color. And I think it's called like Samoa Lua. There's two varieties that the farmers commonly use. The big taro farmers go. So I think it was like Samoa Lua, and there's like Galofusi and Galosalani that weren't as common, but I think they're like a green stem varieties. But my favorite, yeah, Samoa Lua, the pink variety of taro.
That's the knowledge that I hope that more people can share because I would love to learn myself. So, in terms of like taro, and I think you talked about Misiluki. What interests me is that there's such a connection between the crops and our own traditions. One of the things that you talked about was the different months and how it relates to crops. I've never really noticed it because the way I've always been taught is seasons. Someone had talked about how it depends on the fish, right? Like it's akule or balolo season. But I didn't realize it was specific by months.
I learned that from a knowledge that was gathered in the 1800s that had documented the seasons. And then it was kind of brought together with the European months. But the knowledge around harvesting of crops and balolo seasons, I found it really hard to find that type of knowledge because I know Māori have a very deep understanding of the seasons, like maramataka, by planting by the moon. And I wanted to find the similar thing for us in Samoa. And so the closest thing I came to was Samoan seasons that kind of followed the months. If we're on the land, working on the land and knowing when we need to resource foods, then people will know in Samoa at the moment when there's abundance of balolo or the right time to harvest breadfruit or galo. Even there's like avocado seasons and I think I remember seeing like a truck full of oranges. What I was trying to get with that is we used to have a really um deep understanding of the land and when food was ready, the right time to eat things. Whereas now that connection is lost because we can just go to the supermarket and buy something that's not in season. But some people don't realize that its fruits come in different seasons. And so I'm wanting to revitalize that knowledge that we had a really big understanding with the land. It also affects our health in terms of what foods to eat at certain times and the land providing for us and providing for our health. So, and plus, I was just really interested in the Samoan seasons as well because it's such a cool knowledge to learn.
I think so too. I think I don't know yet. I tend to do a lot of TikTok live lately, and someone had come in and talked about how some of the spaces in Savaii, like the one that we call the Tieseo Lupe, but apparently there's a theory out there that it's not necessarily a Tieseo Lupe, but it's actually how it counts the stars, almost like the Aztecs. There's so much things out there that you're just like, wow, there's so much to learn. I guess my next question is, especially now with your PhD, how do you balance the academia portion where it's written source resources compared to our tradition, which is the oral tradition that is based on, knowledge that's been passed down? How are you balancing academia writing with what is there traditionally?
It's really hard because when we do a PhD or master's or bachelor's degree, it's set up within a Western system using Western methodologies. So I kind of see it as that we have to kind of structure our thesis, write our thesis to appease the Western way because we're doing a PhD, but also trying to integrate our traditional knowledge, oral knowledge into like a Western frame. So it's kind of like fitting a circle into a square. Like it's kind of hard to do it, but I've found a way through Pacific methodologies. And so I'm really thankful for all the researchers and professors who have created the Pacific lens and methodologies to allow us to explain how we do our things our way in a Western way so other non-Pacific people can understand. And so that's where I'm trying to really weave both the traditional knowledge and the Western knowledge together in a written document in my thesis to kind of appease both. But I also acknowledge that the PhD thesis in itself is a PhD thesis. But what I'm ultimately wanting to do is to share that knowledge with our community. So there's also going to be another resource so we can explain our findings in our way so we can make it most impactful for communities so they can use the knowledge straight away in their own lives.
I don't know. That sounds just frustrating to me.
Ah,
The next question that I have is like, how do you stay aligned when systems don't work out in your favor?
yeah. I guess when I've come across that, I've really leaned on my supervisors for my PhD. So I have 3 supervisors that help guide my work. And then I also have a Pacific PhD group within the university. And I found just talking about PhD challenges and kind of like whining about things have really helped me process things when they don't align or when things don't go to plan. So I find having really good support groups have helped me get through those challenges.
I think this is going into mental health. I am been a PhD student, but having to do dissertation takes up a lot of work. How do you find that balance? I'm sure you're focusing on school and study, but how do you find time for yourself?
I understood at the beginning that the PhD is a marathon, so it's a long process. So I put in place things like I'm not going to do any work on the weekends, which I used to do before and felt really guilty about not doing work on the weekends. And then when I built up that habit, then I was able to have a break from the PhD stuff and really separate it from my life and what I like to do outside of PhD. And then I also put in a boundary of I think it was like more treating the PhD like a job, like a 9 to 5. So, okay, I'm only going to study from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. After 5 o'clock, I have to leave the office and just go. So, putting out really simple boundaries so that I could not burn out at the end was really important. And I learned that just from learning from other people's stories about being so burnt out from their PhD that they didn't even finish it. And so I thought I really want to finish this work, make sure it's going to be helpful for our communities. So I need to make sure that I'm all right.
That's good to know. You do a lot of social media at the same time. How has social media kind of helped you with your study?
Yeah, actually the social media is my like enjoyment times. I will do a lot of the planning on the weekend and it's helped me re-look at my data analysis, like conclusions in a way that's going to be translatable for communities. Because often in academia, we can be very specific about our findings and look at the scientific jargon, which only really means a lot to us in the academic community. But ultimately, I'm like, well, this work is for our community. How's it going to help them? So it actually gives me a challenge to see how to translate our scientific findings to our community and translate that in a way that people are going to connect with it or learn something from it or implement it in their lives. So it's helped so much, and particularly when I'm doing presentations, even within the science community, like I'm able to talk about my research in a way that's if someone doesn't have expertise in genetics, they can understand it. And I found communication has been really valuable within a science career. To be able to communicate your work is just such a strong skill to have. So it's been really beneficial having the social media alongside my PhD work.
A lot of people tend to pivot away from social media because it's a distraction. But I see that has been something that helped you with your study. So, how am I trying to rephrase this? A year ago compared to now, you've done a lot of research. What is something that you have found out this year that is different from what you've learned previously?
I feel like, so now I've looked at all my results and all the data, and actually what the questions that we asked in the beginning is a bit different to what we've carried out. I had original research question in mind and hypothesis of my thesis, but now it's actually completely changed in terms of my research question. So initially it was looking at the Samoan traditional diet to see if it can be preventative of type 2 diabetes. But now we're kind of approaching it from a genetic side in addressing type 2 diabetes and understanding our traditional foods. I don't know that answers your question, but I guess that's part of the PhD process, that you'll start off with something, an idea in mind, an objective, an hypothesis, a research question. But once you get to the end of your PhD, that may change and your results may look completely different. And it's kind of hard to grapple with because you set your life up for 3 years researching this thing, but then you find something that doesn't really answer that question in the beginning. So trying to get my head around that.
When you talk about genetics, is there something particular that got you interested in then changing that hypothesis? Or maybe you could share with us as to something that's intriguing that probably has led you to take on that?
Yeah, I'd say must be influenced from my supervisors. So in our laboratory, we work a lot with Māori Pacific genetics. And there are some really cool genes that we have that are protective of type 2 diabetes. So, for instance, if you have this gene called the CREBRF gene, CREBRF, so if you have the CREBRF gene, you're less likely to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which is really a positive because these genes are protective of things like type 2 diabetes. So, we're wanting to explore, like, are there any other interesting genes that could be helpful for us? And so that's what led me to looking at the genetics within our Samoan women. So we were interested in genetics related to diet. There's a lactose intolerance is genetic and also a gene related to carbohydrate digestion. So when you're eating breads or taro or breadfruit, there's an enzyme called amylase that breaks down these carbohydrates, and there's a gene that's related to it. So really interesting to see, is it good to have these genes? Is it bad? Does it have an effect on our diabetes or our health? So that's what kind of led me to the genetic side of my work.
Are Samoans prone to a particular type of gene that contributes to these factors?
We're not really sure in terms of gene-diet interactions, but there is that CREBRF gene that I mentioned that's found like in Polynesians. I don't know if this is Samoan specific. It was actually originally found in the Samoan cohort, but the CREBRF gene is more common within Polynesian populations, which is really good because, when we're most at risk of a metabolic disease like type 2 diabetes, but we have a gene that's protective of it, it's like, okay, what's happening here? Like, we want the good stuff for us to help us with our health.
In terms of the pool that you take, like you're using to kind of help with your study, is it more Samoans living in the diaspora or is it more Samoans living in Samoa?
Yeah, my work is looking at Samoan women living in New Zealand. And we did that because during the time of planning this project, it was during COVID. So we thought that in order to kind of keep ourselves safe and communities safe, that we'll just keep all of the work here in New Zealand where I am. But initially we were thinking about going to Samoa because there's so much knowledge around Samoan traditional foods. And there is research suggesting differences in terms of eating patterns in Samoa and in New Zealand and, in the States as well and in Australia. So ideally, it would have been great to do some work in Samoa and New Zealand. But just because of COVID, my work just looked at Samoan women here in New Zealand.
You've been working on your PhD for some time now. So are you in a ending phase, or what phase are you in currently for your PhD?
I'm currently writing my PhD and planning to have a full draft of my thesis at the end of this month, and then planning to submit my whole thesis in at the end of April. So yeah.
So you're almost there. Whoop
Yeah.
whoop.
Yeah, I can see the light.
Good, good for you. Once that's done, is there anything in the horizon for yourself? Like, what do you envision yourself to be at in the next year or two?
So I got some funding to share my PhD results with community. So doing more community group engagement and really just presenting my work to community and being like, hey, what is most helpful for your lives? And is there a resource that we can create to share that to more people? So whether that's doing things on social media, doing like a documentary or creating a book or doing like a 7 night, like really excited to do more community work and share my PhD findings.
Ooh, I like a Siva night.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why it's great to have you on the Dear Sunga podcast, my friend and I were talking the other day, and she's, a different generation. And we were talking about how our environment kind of influences what kind of career we go into. And we didn't really have that. Even for myself, it's either be a doctor, lawyer, or be a teacher. There's a lot that you can do just with science. But I also see a lot of my students having to step into STEM. So I'm curious because I think a lot of things are impacted by our environment. February 11 is International Women's and Girls in STEM. I think there's a way that we can nurture that curiosity. What inspired you, or how did you get into science?
In high school, we weren't exposed to the different careers within science. So, yeah, similar to students, I didn't know a lot about even research in academia. I feel like how I got here was first, yeah, I followed my friends, but then I also was exploring, what am I good at and what do I enjoy within the science area? And I explored that by doing a range of papers. I also went and did some internships during the summer. Could I picture myself in a lab or could I picture myself doing science work? And after, I think I did 4 summers of internship, I was like, this is really cool and I can see myself doing this. And by exploring, the possibility of being in a lab, I was like, yeah, that made me more confident to pursue the science career. I also got the opportunity to ask other people within the science field, like, what is your day like? How often are you in the lab or how often do you interact with people? So talking to different people within the science industry or the lab really helped me get an idea of where I could picture myself and where I couldn't picture myself. Like I just couldn't do anything chemistry based. Like that's just not me. But I could see myself, working in the field, working in the laboratory, now working with people. So really exploring all my options helped me get to the science career and made me confident in my decision that I could see that I talked with people, I did an internship, and just seeing what like I really liked and where I could picture myself being happy and doing it for 9 to 5 for years. And I think for those who aren't really sure about getting into science, it's really about talking to people who are in science. And it's great we have social media now because you can just message people, be like, hey, like, what does your week look like? Or how much do you get paid? Things like that. And by doing that, you can find out straight away if you want to be in science or not. And like, if you don't want to be in science, it's a good thing. Move on to the next thing, try more things to see what you like and see where you can picture yourself.
If you weren't going to go into science, what were some other careers that you would have pursued?
Definitely something in the music industry. So I played violin in high school, classical violin, and I loved it. And I did it from a very young age. And so I could definitely see myself playing in orchestras or being a teacher as well, teaching violin or some type of music or even something creative. I've found now that I have more of an interest in storylines and documentaries. So maybe something like director, kind of overarching, seeing something like a story or storytelling. Definitely something in the arts. Like that's what I feel like I would be really good at.
See now why you like social media and there's a element to it, the connection between the two things. The other question that I'm curious about is because I think with your upbringing, but you mentioned that you were still kind of close to your birth parents. Because to me, it's like she's so interested in learning about Samoa. And so I think about my upbringing just because I'm half Samoan. I've always been very curious about like Samoan legends, and I used to soak that up when I was younger. But I think there was something in terms of my identity that I was also trying to grasp. So I'm curious, what is like something behind not just learning about the crops, but I feel like there's something in terms of identity there for you. I could be off base.
Yeah, I'd say with my upbringing, I didn't have a close connection with my biological parents in terms of understanding cultural events and understanding the Samoan language, and didn't have that exposure that my siblings did of being raised like Fa'a Samoa, so completely immersed in the culture and the religion. And so I think the drive behind my PhD work, my master's, learning about the crops is a search for my identity because I didn't have it in my childhood or even in my teens. It wasn't really until my mid-20s that I wanted to know what Samoan felt like, because throughout my life I identified as New Zealander and understood what being a New Zealander meant, but didn't have a deep connection with being Samoan. And I feel like looking externally Samoan, I'm 5'11", like I'm big, like thick hair. People assume that I know how to speak Samoan and that I know the culture and language, but I don't. And so I kind of felt like a fraud. And so that internal kind of struggle I had was really one of the driving forces to help learn more about my Samoan culture, and really thankful that in a weird way I got to learn about it through science and being able to explore the Samoan culture through science. So yeah, I've been really on that identity journey for the last decade now.
I think some people be like, well, you're not Samoan enough, you know? Listening to you, you're actually helping revive a lot of things that even Samoans don't really know piece of us that might have been forgotten, but you're helping revive that. So I think that's a great thing to have. And so it's all based on that curious mind of yours.
I thought about that because often we're told, science is about curiosity, wanting to find things, understand why things happen for a reason. And I guess, yeah, I'm kind of doing that with my own identity journey.
It's wonderful. I think there's lots of things that you have brought forward, like the months, for example. I didn't know that. So let's say if someone wants to pursue something in STEM, and maybe someone out there is aspiring to be in that field. How could they reach you, or how would they be able to connect with you to learn a little bit more about the profession?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, at Samoan Scientist. So I'm always up to have a chat. Message me any questions that you have or any comments as well. I'm more than happy to help.
Is there anything in particular we didn't cover that maybe something that would resonate with people?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about its industry from what I've experienced, but also your experience this in life, and that whatever you do, you're going to have to work hard and it's not going to be easy. I thought going into science, when I plan my experiments and do them in the lab, that they're going to work out. They never do. Every time you do an experiment, something will go wrong, and that's life. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that going in. So I was incredibly upset. I thought I was the stupid one doing the techniques wrong. But they just said, that's science. You have to do an experiment multiple times for it to work. So what I found is that you need to be okay with the challenges and acknowledge that nothing is going to go right, but perseverance. You don't have to be the smartest person. You don't have to be the brightest person in your class. You just have to be willing to work really hard and have the perseverance and not give up. I've had so many challenges in science in terms of within the laboratory and externally in terms of the academic criteria, just so many challenges, but I never gave up. And so it's if you're thinking about going into the science career or any career, it's going to be hard, but you have to be willing to work hard and persevere. I can't emphasize that enough.
That's a great message to have. That's actually something that I struggle with too, because I think sometimes I can be very controlling and be like, I want this to be exactly the way I
Yes,
want it to be. And then
yes,
you're
that's
like,
me.
you try so hard to kind of make it happen, but you just got to learn, let it flow. I'm not saying that it's perfect because I'm always going to be that type A personality, but it's good to kind of have that humbling experience and just making sure you feel that that's important. So, thank you for sharing that. That's super awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I was just gonna say, like, I'm a Virgo and love organizing things, and that if things don't go according to plan, like, everything's wrong. It's extra hard when you try to do experimental work and nothing goes right, but that
Before recording, I was just like, I'm gonna get this all set up. I'm gonna go do my sound bath, and then I'm gonna come and in my head it's gonna be perfect. But yeah, nothing is ever really perfect. Thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure to connect with you. You've been super awesome. Hopefully, we get some more opportunities later down the road to connect and learn more about your dissertation and how it goes. I'm excited for you. And, dear Sunga, that's really just what it's about. There's a reason why I wanted to do this because we can help each other grow. So, sharing the knowledge, sharing what we do know, help someone else in their journey, if they're aspiring to be it or like yourself, you're just an inspiration to everyone. So thank you for taking the time today. I appreciate
thank you
you.
so much. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'd love to come back and share my final summary and findings of my work.
Yes, let's do that.
Before we close, as I've been editing, she talked about perseverance, about how in science things rarely go right, nothing is perfect. And that's not just science, that's life. And that's what she said, right? This past week, I found myself in a space of doubt, questioning myself, something that I constantly struggle with. We're not enough, we're behind, we should have done more. But hearing Amy speak reminded me, and maybe it's a reminder for you too, that growth is rarely neat. We will have our highs and our lows, moments where we feel confident and moments where we feel like we're starting all over again. And in those spaces of doubt, I just want to offer a gentle reminder: you are enough. And as I say it to you, I'm also saying it to myself. Even while you're learning, even while you're questioning, even while you're becoming, and I think that message is especially important for women and young girls who are thinking about stepping into any field where they may not always see themselves reflected. Curiosity is enough, willingness is enough. And that's something I admire about Amy. We learn from one another, we build knowledge together, and what's still being rediscovered. There's an alangaup that came to mind. Awatu fo'i ni lo, ai au mai ni lo. Give a lo and receive a lo. It speaks to exchange, to reciprocity, to shared learning. I love tying that proverb to Amy's work, especially with her digital calendar where she maps cultural knowledge, seasons, and food systems. She shares all knowledge to help our community. And in return, we bring our knowledge, our memories, our lived experiences, our questions, and together we expand what we know. So, if today's conversation resonated with you, whether it was the science, identity journey, the cultural rediscovery, or simply the reminder to persevere, I encourage you to connect with Amy's work. I've linked her website below where you can explore her research, community resources, and ways to engage, including her digital calendar. So check it out. And if you found value in this episode, I invite you to support the podcast. Subscribe and turn on your notifications so you'll be the first to know when new conversations drop. And if you know another Sunga who's navigating doubt, curiosity, identity, or their own STEM journey, please share this episode with them. Your support, your shares, your comments, they truly help. Until the next episode, with all my alofa and mana, dia soy Fu Manuel.